Hello, welcome to the Raws live weekly Sunderland question and answer show. Apologies if you tuned in about 10 minutes ago and caught the first 2 minutes of a show, but we did have massive streaming issues, which we've managed to resolve. So, Conor Bromley, I will ask you for the second time today, how are you doing, mate?
I am well, yes. Looking forward to talking about Sunderland's 0-0 draw with Brighton.
You were halfway through a question I'd just asked you, but I'll ask you again. Are Sunderland now safe from relegation given the Premier League table? I think there's a 14-point gap. Wolves look doomed. They haven't won all season. What is it, 2 points? Burnley have put up a little bit of a better fist of it, but to me look like they lack real quality and the wins have really dried up and they've stopped taking points. So you're just looking at that one spot, I think. I personally think Sunderland have got enough, but I'm sort of hardwired over the years to not be too confident about it until it's mathematically done. Where do you sit?
I think I'm always looking at the relegation first. I did that in League One, did that in the Championship. I always in them leagues wanted 50 points, and then you can worry about achieving anything else. And I think it's the same in the Premier League. I am always looking at 40 points. I do, for example, last night I watched the Leeds game against Crystal Palace because I'm sort of watching to see what's happening down the bottom. But I think the reality is Sunderland aren't in a relegation scrap and won't be this season if we play at the level of Leicester did last season. Till the end of the season, we'd finish with 41 points. We are obviously miles better than that Leicester City team. Even if you just look at some of the home games we've got to play this season, we've got Burnley at home, we've got Fulham at home, we've obviously got Leeds coming up at home. If you win all three of them games, you're just about safe as well. So I don't think Sunderland are in a relegation scrap, but I'm always looking down the table to make sure we're getting, we're 14 points clear of West Ham. They've only picked up 30 this season. They've got to, if they match that from now over the next 17 games, they'll only just about be catching up with us. So, yeah, I don't think Sunderland fans have to massively worry about it, but obviously if we lost 5 or 6 games in a row, you might get sucked in a little bit, but I don't think that'll happen.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. What did you make of the Brighton game? Because I thought in the first half particularly, I thought Sunderland were really, really good. I thought they probably should have scored in that half. Second half after the interval, I thought Sunderland were good again for about another 20, 30 minutes. Then Brighton sort of came into it in a big way. So coming out of the game, I was very, very satisfied with a point and a clean sheet. I sort of thought that's another challenge and test ticked off, because my big concern, Conor, coming into the game was, can you go again emotionally after the Newcastle game? Can you find that little bit of consistency away from home? You've had this big, massive high that you've worked all season towards, which was the Newcastle United game. You've got the win. Can you go again? How much have you got left in the tank? And I think Sunderland actually answered that question for me.
Yeah, and we had the question of AFCON as well, which I'm sure we will talk about, but we had those issues thrown in. I think overall, before the game, we all would have took a point, and I think if you'd offered us before we'd played Bournemouth, if you'd offered us the points total we've got from that, which is obviously 2 wins, 2 draws, and 1 defeat in that period, I think we all would have snapped your hands off of that as well. So I think it's just a fantastic point. Not many teams go to Brighton and get something. They haven't. They've not been kept off the score sheet since April in the Premier League at home. So we've went there and done something not many teams do. And while, yes, they maybe came into the game, they had little spells in it, but we never really looked like conceding a goal. There wasn't any, oh my God moments in the match, really, where I thought, oh, we've really done lucky there to keep ourselves on nil. And again, at the other end, I thought we were pretty good in the first half, but we didn't create all that much to actually win the game. We didn't have a chance where I thought, oh, that should have went in. We didn't have an Isidore against Liverpool kind of chance. So I think a 0-0 draw is probably just about fair. Paul Merson said it was the worst game he's ever seen. I don't think it was that bad. There were shots in the game.
Yeah, I thought it was quite good to watch. I mean, there were still moments. Alderete hit the bar. I thought Simon Adingra on the left-hand side was interesting. And I thought both teams actually played some decent football. It was by far the worst game I've ever seen. You should try watching Sunderland in League One at times. I mean, Christ, you get a shock now.
Yeah, well, even if you watched Sunderland against Newcastle last week, I mean,
yeah.
This was more eventful than that game in terms of just general play. So it's sort of, I think what we know of this Sunderland team is that they are defensively very, very good. We saw that again. We can sit and we can talk about the issues you've got going forward. Look, it's obvious that our front line, even before AFCON, it's got nothing to do with losing the players. Our front line isn't, massively prolific and doesn't look like creating tons of chances in games, and that's maybe catching up with us a little bit. But I also think I saw a lot of positive signs from Adingra yesterday. I thought I saw some positive signs from Mundell when he came on as well. I did think Rigg struggled a little bit in the game, but again, he's still a teenager and he's playing, his third Premier League start, of which one of them he was hooked after half an hour because of a red card. So there were positive signs for me. I think Adingra in particular, if we can give him the next few games, I think we'll start to see a better player because he offers us something that we haven't really had. He's quite direct. I think he can really take on a man, maybe better than any other player we've got right now. And I think he can be a threat. So I was pretty impressed with him yesterday, and I think that he's a player that will grow as we continue to use him over this AFCON period. But it is concerning. I think that the club desperately needs to bring in a right-sided player, right winger. I think that's the area that we're looking at and saying that it looks quite weak. But again, this is nitpicking with a team that's very, very good. Like I'm talking about finishing off this already very good team by bringing that player in. It's not the end of the world if we don't do anything in January.
No, absolutely. I'll just have a little look at the YouTube and the Facebook comments. We're joined by quite a few regulars. Lee Reed says, afternoon, lads. Jennifer says, hello. Virginia Adams says, hello. Lexi's got a question as well, which we'll come to a little bit later. Connor, let's touch upon Chris Rigg a little bit because I think he's been around that long that we forget that he's only 18 years old. And he looked at times excellent in the Championship last season. He really competed. Obviously, he was playing through the middle quite a bit as well. To me, he looks, when I see him, that he's still got that technical brilliance, but he just looks a little bit lightweight for me. I thought that was the problem he ran into against Brighton, that he was knocked off the ball quite a bit. I think it benefited him playing in front of Makwele, who was able to sort of marshal him and could sort of win that physical battle for him. I think it's something he's going to have to sort of improve on. Thankfully, he can look at Enzo Lefebvre, who's a similar type of stature and is very, very strong on the ball. But I think that would be an area of improvement that I would identify for Chris Rigg. But I've seen not necessarily a lot of negative comments towards him, but he's been singled out as somebody who maybe didn't perform as well on the day. But you touched on it there. What I will say is that he hasn't had that run of games, that rhythm. And I do think that's worth mentioning because it's very, very hard for a player to come in and just start impacting the game, especially so young. You need only look at Bertrand Traore, who was sort of in and out a little bit. He'd obviously just joined the club, but as soon as he got a run of 4, 5, 6 games, he really started to improve, gel with his teammates. And I think you can't be too harsh on him, Chris Rigg, but you also have to say that there's a few things he needs to improve on if he is to sort of cement a regular starting place over the course of this AFCON period.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I don't think you can be harsh, and I would refuse to be harsh on Chris Rigg because he's so young and he clearly has a lot of talent behind him. I think that, to be honest, if I was to be critical, I'd probably be critical of the management on that because they have had opportunities to give him minutes in the past. We went to Man City away, and the substitutions that were made that day when we brought off Siddiqui and Xhaka should have, in my opinion, saw somebody like Rigg and maybe Dan Neil come on and get minutes. And I think we've seen moments like that. He could have brought on Rigg and hasn't, which I think, again, if he'd maybe played another, 3 or 4 substitute appearances, maybe another start in there at times, you probably would see a more rounded player at this level. Because I think a lot of the issues he had yesterday against Brighton was, I think he maybe thinks he's got a little bit more time on the ball. I think he maybe thinks that he's a bit stronger than what he is, but that's because he's not played in this league. I mean, basically, the last time he was playing regular football was in the Championship. He did have the extra second on the ball. He was, maybe not as strong as Championship players, but was able to sort of at times hold his own in that regard, and he's not played that much in the Premier League, so to throw him in, you can see that maybe he is a little, has a little second slow, but I think that'll come with him, and I think fundamentally this is a process for Chris Rigg, isn't it? He's so young that for the next 18 months or so, I think he'll be constantly kind of in and out the team and learning. And every time we see him get a run, I think he should play against Leeds. I think he should play throughout this period. I don't know if you'd risk him against Man City just because of their quality, but he definitely should play against Leeds. But I think the more he plays, the better he's going to get, and that's the good thing with young players. But yeah, I don't buy the criticism. And I've seen quite a bit of criticism, to be honest, after the game yesterday. People saying strikers aren't good enough, and I'm like, I don't know if they're watching something different to me or have less of an understanding of what football is. I don't get it.
I've seen that as well. I've seen a little bit of criticism of Isidore and Broby and that we need to go out and spend big in January and really be ruthless and clinical. And I do understand that maybe those strikers are not prolific and that can be a little bit of a problem. But whilst we're defending well and still getting results, these players are very new into the league. They need time to adapt, all of that sort of stuff. So I think Sunderland, as you pointed out in our group chat, Connor, are bottom of the XG table in the minute in terms of goals scored. Now, there's a lot of other things that we could say about that you mentioned on the podcast last week. I'm going to go to some YouTube comments, actually, because we've got a few just on the game. Lee Reid said over on YouTube, our decision-making is what let us down yesterday. Hume shooting instead of passing to Bromley. Geertruida taking the ball off Adingra and the cross too many times, not owning the ball. I think that's fair. I think Sunderland's sort of decision-making was a little bit sloppy, but I think you're going to get games like that. Lee also adds that overall it was a good performance for about 60 minutes. A point at Brighton is not to be sniffed at. Still that clear instinct in front of goal. I think that's a key thing for me as well, Connor, is that Brighton are a good side. I know there's a little bit of discontent within their fan base at the moment. They've spent a lot of money. I really rate their coach, Fabian Hertzler. They've been doing this a long time. They've been buying low, selling high, competing in the Premier League, sort of living well beyond the means, really, with the model they've had. And it's sort of what Sunderland's model is based around. So to go there away from home, get a point, a clean sheet, back-to-back clean sheets. Sunderland still haven't lost consecutive games in the Premier League either this season, which I think is a remarkable achievement for a newly promoted side. Just to circle back round, but I know we all want Sunderland to be the best it can possibly be. And on the balance of play, maybe we could have scored, but I'm still just delighted with that point. I think it's I think over the course of the season it could prove to be a really valuable one. Any point away from home for a newly promoted side in the Premier League is a good one.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if you look at, what our friends Leeds and Burnley have done this season, Leeds obviously picked up a big win last night, but overall they would rather have had our season, and they also really struggle on the road, them two teams. I think they've both only won one away game this season against Wolves of all teams, so that probably explains that. Whereas we have continually picked up the odd point here and there on the road. We've picked up 2 wins. We beat Forest, we beat Chelsea. I don't know if I'm missing one, but I'm sure we've got 2 wins, a few draws, and obviously all of our defeats have come on the road. I think you've just got to take any point you can whenever you go away from home. And I think the lack of killer instinct and the lack of edge in the final third is the manager willing to sacrifice that defensive solidity to maybe give us that extra edge almost in the final third. And I think that's the balance that needs to be weighed up. And that's why for me, that right wing position, I think, is actually the answer to a lot of our issues. And I think if we can bring in a really good player for that position, we bought, say, Sadiq and Diarra in central midfield. If we can get a player of that calibre but on the right hand side, I think we would look like a very, very dangerous team. And I think for me, that's what I want to see us do. And as Bo Jimgills, who comments on my channel as well, yeah, you can point at the strikers all you want, but fundamentally they're not getting masses of service. I know Lefay yesterday was very creative, and I think sometimes we are getting into good positions and not taking the opportunity, or where snatching it, where to maybe shooting when we should be passing. But again, I think that will come with time. We know that this team can score goals. We've seen it this season. It's not like we've been barren for the whole campaign, and we've also played in the last 4 games where we have struggled. We've played Liverpool. We've played not Arsenal. We played Liverpool. We played Man City. We've played Newcastle, and we've played Brighton. All of which are top level teams in this league. You would all expect them to be in the top 6 or 7 come the end of the season. I had Brighton 5th, Newcastle in the Champions League, and obviously the other two are the other two.
And we were looking at this run as well before AFCON kicked in, the festive run of fixtures, and we were all looking at the Leeds and Brighton games like we need to get something from those. Now we're almost ahead of schedule. I'm not saying it doesn't matter what happens against Leeds, because it quite clearly does, but there's not that desperation on that game anymore, that emphasis, that important, because Sunderland have picked up points. They've beaten Newcastle, they've got a point at Brighton. They've got that point at Arsenal, against Arsenal at home. They got the point against Liverpool. So they've just been ticking along nicely, in my opinion.
But when we looked at this run, I started this run in my head at the Bournemouth game.
Exactly.
6 points, I thought, from this run from Bournemouth all the way to play Man City. I was like, well, we need to try and win one of 2 home games in that run. I thought the away games were always going to be so difficult. The fact is that we've already picked up from that, we got 8 points from that run of 5 games. I mean, that's pretty good going. Not many teams in the Premier League, I'm talking the whole league, would look at that run of games and think we could get 8 points from that. So I think we have to sometimes put this into perspective, and I think we've done so well this season at times, I think, and we're all guilty of this, we can get a little bit carried away, and we come away from a Brighton away game or that Liverpool game. There was so much chatter about Isidore missing that chance at the end. But it's like, yeah, but we're going to these places disappointed we haven't picked up extra points. But that, for Sunderland, a newly promoted team, that's pretty unprecedented. I mean, look at our defensive record. We're 4th in the table on our defensive record this season. We've kept 6 clean sheets already this season. You know, that if we're on pace for about 13 clean sheets this season. That's like a third of our game. That's
crazy.
Wild.
Yeah. But, I mean, for a newly promoted side who, what did we sign? What was it, 12 or 13 new players? I mean, the whole of that defence, apart from Trey Hume, who's played out of position, is new. It's mightily impressive, to be honest. I want to circle back round, Connor, to that right wing position, because Chris Rigg got the nod there. Habib Diarra came on in the second half, and he played in the right wing spot, which I was slightly surprised by. I thought he'd come back into the middle if he was going to come on. We get a lot of comments about Sunderland's fringe players on YouTube and Facebook, and please get in touch with more of your talking points and questions if you would like. We get messages all the time about Dennis Cirk and Dan Neil, but Elijah Mayenda now sort of fallen into that category where he obviously started the first game against West Ham opening day of the season. He scores the goal, he does well. He slipped further and further down the pecking order. I thought he would be a candidate to start on the right wing. I guess Chris Rigg might give you a little bit more defensive rigidity. Elijah Mayenda's a bit better going forward, but you probably lose something the other way. Have you been surprised he hasn't played more minutes either on the right-hand side or coming on in games? I know Le Bris is using a 60-30 split or 70-20 with Isidore and Broby sort of rotating those, but Mayenda gives you a little bit something different, doesn't he? And he knows where the net is, and he produces moments like Broby and Isidore do as well. But he signed a 5-year contract in the summer. It's clear that Sunderland rate him and have a plan for him, and he's got a future. But I would like to see him play a little bit more, to be honest, because he's a player that's done a lot for us, and I think he's quite talented.
I would agree, and I was sort of surprised that it was Rigg getting the nod on the right wing, but I do kind of understand that, because I think Rigg tactically is going to be better in terms of he can tuck into central areas better. He's going to be more defensively responsible compared to Mayenda. But Mayenda, I think when he came on against Man United earlier this season, and he created chances. He had one chance himself and created one for Talby. I think he looks good when he comes on. He can run at a player. That's something that we do lack. We lack ball carriers in those attacking positions. He's also got a very good partnership with Isidore. I don't think either of them have played together this season, which is startling to me, because last season that was a bit of a go-to for us when we were chasing games, was to try and get those two on the pitch together. I really like Mayenda, and the only thing I can think, and I think this with a few of our younger players, is if it's a case of the manager being like, no, you need the time on the training pitch to get used to what the Premier League is, and you need to figure it out. And if we look at Mayenda's career, you know, he came in that first season, had injuries, he had that loan at Hibs, which didn't really work well. Then he comes in the second season, though, and he's brilliant. We get promoted. I wonder if this season's going to be a little bit like his first season, where he's just acclimatising to things. And then next season, we'll see with Mayenda what he's going to be. Because I would also say that the club seem to be very, very forthright with players as to what their roles are going to be. I would suspect when Mayenda signed his contract in the summer, they would have said to him, look, we are not saying that you're going to be a starter every week. You're going to have to really fight to get any minutes on the pitch. I don't think Mayenda looks unhappy. He was front and centre of the picture against Newcastle last week, wasn't he? Holding his shirt.
He still does his G'ing up after the game and all that sort of stuff, because he does that sort of that thing with the crowd, doesn't he? Which is always quite nice. But that hasn't stopped, so you'd assume that he's still fairly happy.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think, to be honest, the club's done a really good job of keeping these fringe players happy, because Rigg and Neil were a big part of this. And if I was Dan Neil, in particular Dan Neil, I would be pretty sick this season thinking, God, I helped the squad get up, and I haven't gotten any real minutes. But yet he still seems to be positive around it. So whatever they're doing behind the scenes to make everyone feel like a really big part of this, they deserve massive credit for, because it clearly is working. We do have that group mentality, and you're seeing it with all the players. Luke 9's the same. You know, how many games will Luke 9 play from now at the end of the season, especially after that stupid red card he got? Probably not many, but I would suspect that Luke 9 doesn't want to leave, you know, anytime soon, because he feels like he's part of this group. I mean, I don't think he's happy to be a cheerleader the rest of his career, but I certainly think he feels part of it, and I think they've done a really good job doing that. And I think Mayenda possibly right now is just chomping at the bit to get in. And I think when he does get in, whether or not it's against Leeds, there's an argument maybe you stick him on the right wing against them. I think he'll be ready.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things on this for me. The big one is like obviously there's less games in the Premier League than there is in the Championship, so sometimes you have to sort of take that into account as well. Obviously, Sunderland aren't in Europe; they're not in the Carabao Cup anymore, so that there are sort of limited minutes. And I think with Mayenda and Rigg, whenever they're out the team for a period of time or an extended period of time, because of the way Sunderland have handled them previously in the Championship, there's almost like a clamour, isn't there? It's almost like, oh my God, they're going to stagnate. We need to loan these players out. We need to do something with them. They're not playing. I would send them out somewhere. And that may well be a valid option somewhere down the line. But at the same time, one is 18 years old and has played probably close to 75 senior games. And Eliza Mayand is 20 years old and has scored a goal at Wembley to promote Sunderland. Has had a season where I think he got 15 goals and assists last season. Like, we can take our time with them. As you mentioned, there's clearly a plan. The club have clearly communicated to them. I don't feel like there's any rush. If we get 6 months down the line and they've played 10 times between them and off the bench and stuff like that, I think, yes, absolutely. There's an argument to be saying they need to go out and prove themselves again, get some minutes, come back and reassess. But for me at the moment, it's just like, I'm in no rush to see these players go anywhere. I think they can contribute to the squad. I think that's positive. We'll just head back to the YouTube comments. Mr. Bojingle says, Mayenda runs at defences, but it's a consistency issue. I'd probably agree with that because going forward, he can be exceptional, but I think it's his defensive work, which is what would cause Le Bris to stop and think about starting him on the right-hand side. Mr. Bojingles also says the standard set by Xhaka will be higher than most Championship clubs. Obviously, Lee Reid says, spot on, Connor. There were so many negative comments yesterday about Adingra and Rigg. They haven't been playing very much, and I thought Adingra did very well. Connor, let's actually touch on Adingra. You mentioned him earlier. I actually really like him. I think he does some really positive things. It was a bit of a surprise to see him sort of start on the left. I thought in the first half an hour, Sunderland were just looking for him constantly, and he was open a lot of the time. I really rate him, but I think it's his end product which really lets him down. He always looks like he's on the verge of doing something, and then he sort of beats himself. And I can understand now why Brighton fans have been a little bit frustrated with him in the past. And some of the comments when he moved from the South Coast up to the North East did centre around, yeah, he's good, but he can be really frustrating at times. I think we're seeing that now. But in terms of the criticism yesterday, for him coming in from the cold, I actually thought it was a decent performance from Simon Adingra.
I would agree. Yeah, I thought it was. I watched him and I thought he was threatening. And I also think that, when you're trying to assess players and the way you watch them, Adingra gives us different things to what our other wingers do. And he gambles more. And I know somebody talked about his defensive work. But fundamentally, we cause Brighton problems because normally we are so defensive on the wings that it means that the opposition can push their fullbacks because we are so defensive, whereas Adingra is getting space because he's gambling on the fact the fullback, say, pushes up and then he's got space to exploit. And I think we did that quite well yesterday in the first half. That was clearly a directive in there. And I think that's probably why he went with Rigg, because Rigg could tuck in and sort of make that midfield more solid. And Adingra had that license to go forward. That's probably the reason why he wouldn't put Mayenda out there, because Mayenda's quite similar. Mayenda probably does want to gamble a bit more. I mean, certainly if we were look at the Leeds game, for example, coming up, Leeds play with wing backs, but they don't have other wide players, do they? So I think you could potentially make the argument that we can take the risk with Adingra or Mayenda in that game because Leeds only have them one fullbacks playing against them. So I think that's an interesting one, but to see what will happen with that. But yeah, I thought Adingra did well, and even when he was at Brighton, he wasn't getting consistent football all the time. Like he was a bench player, he was a rotation option. It's Sunderland. If he can get this run now through to probably like the Everton game in the FA Cup, if he can play regular minutes and play 60, 70 minutes in all these games, you will see a better player. That's just the reality of how it works in football. The more minutes he gets, the more confident he's going to be. So I'm not willing to necessarily say his end product isn't there, because I don't think he's played enough. And we saw on the opening day that cross he put in, I think it was Ballard's goal, wasn't it? He set up.
I think so, yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. That was an unbelievable cross on his wrong side as well. I think that we'll see the best of him as time goes on. And you've also got to remember, we were playing a good team yesterday, so he's playing against a top I would say they're a top 8 Premier League team. That's where I'd expect
Yeah.
Brighton to be come the end of the season. Difficult playing against that sort of opposition. So I think he did really, really well, all things considered.
I guess the flip side of it is, though, for Simon Adingra, is that he has this chance during AFCON, but he really, really has to grasp it with both hands. Because when those lads come back, Bertrand Traore, Talby's going to be around, Siddiqui comes back, so then that allows maybe Enzo Lefebvre to move on to the left if needs be. He really needs to show now in these games that he's worth his starting spot, because, sort of post mid-January, the end of January, Sunderland's squad, possibly even with some additions, hopefully we don't get any more injuries or anything like that. It's going to look good for Régis Le Bris in terms of the options he's going to have.
It is, and we've also been pretty lucky with injuries this season. Touch wood, and I did touch wood there, but we've been pretty lucky with injuries this season, haven't we? So we can.
I love that. I love that. We've been pretty good with injuries this season by Sunderland standards, which meant that only our record £30 million signing has been out for the season, which is actually, by comparison, quite decent for us.
Yeah, well, that is true. We did lose Ballard for a little bit. We did lose Alderete for a little bit. But all things considered, I remembered when we had like Steve Bruce's manager and we had just 14, 15 injuries the whole time he was manager. So right now I'm looking at it and thinking, well, it's the same thing with some of our defensive cover. I can't envisage Luke O'Nien playing games of football at Sunderland. But if we were to pick up 2 centre-back injuries, well, he's going to suddenly be in the conversation. And it's a lot of our depth players has been like we've been very fortunate. Yes, we did lose Diarra, which was a big blow, but Enzo Lefebvre tucks into that position the most logically. If we lost Diarra and Siddiqui, or heaven forbid we lost Diarra, Siddiqui and Xhaka, then you would have seen players like Dan Neil play more minutes. We've been quite fortunate this season that the squad's been able to manage itself quite well, which is probably why we haven't seen as many fringe players. But the point I was eventually going on to with that is that when we get to January, we could still be in the FA Cup. We could be chasing that, which could change the dynamics of the squad if we're playing 3 game weeks. But we haven't really had that this season. Going out the Carabao Cup early, I thought was criminal from our perspective, because I think we really could have done with those extra games to give players minutes and keep them ticking over and finding form among those fringe players. I think that was a real big blow for us at the start of the season that we went out that competition. I just hope we've been given a pretty horrible FA Cup draw. I just kind of hope that in the FA Cup we can do that and go on a little bit of a run to actually get players minutes and share minutes around the squad. Now, I think we should be targeting that FA Cup because, as I said, I don't think we'll be in a relegation battle. If we had a big FA Cup game on the weekend and a Premier League game in the week, you've got to prioritise, in my opinion, that if we were to get past Everton in the third round. But I think those extra games, we would start to see more of those rotation options coming at the team, and maybe players like Adingra getting more and more minutes, and Rigg getting more minutes, and Neil potentially getting in the team. And I think that's probably been the one thing this season. The fact we've avoided injuries, these players haven't got as many minutes as they'd expect.
Yeah. Right, let's have a look to the YouTube comments. We have one that says, it's not a goal scoring problem we have. It's a final ball into our goal scorer's problem. Case in point, Hume took on that shot when he had an easy ball through to Broby to put him in on goal. I think that's a fair comment. Brian Lawson adds on YouTube that the Leeds game will be interesting. They are brimming with confidence. We are short of players. Need another gritty performance from the lads. Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth says, I met you last week. I don't know whether that's aimed at me or Connor, but thank you for tuning in. I want to touch on this question actually from Mr. Bo Jingles again. Do we make Geertruida signing permanent? I thought his performance yesterday, Connor, coming in as a central midfielder was really, really strong for a number of reasons. He hasn't played actually in a couple of weeks, certainly not from the start. He didn't get on the pitch at all for the Newcastle United game. I think so far he's played centre-back, full-back, wing-back and centre midfield for Sunderland. He's a real Swiss Army knife of a player. Everywhere you put him, he looks quality, and he looked really, really strong in midfield. It was almost a sort of moment where I was like, okay, he's ahead of Dan Neil, understandably so. That's a little bit of a shame. But then when you watch him play, it's, yeah, he's a Dutch international. It's absolutely right that he starts in centre midfield alongside Xhaka and Enzo Lefebvre, because I think it's the right thing to do, and I think he proved it.
Yeah, and to go to the crux of the question, I mean, I would sign him permanently. What, it's a 17 million quid, isn't it, to make that a permanent deal?
And he's so, I think, yeah, and he's so versatile.
Yeah,
everybody needs a player like that. He's almost like he's like a a higher quality Lugo 9, like a Premier
Yeah.
League Lugo 9, in the sense that he can play in these different positions and do all of them competently.
Yeah, and when we were heading into these games after AFCON started, the main worry was Siddiqui, and it was the left back situation with Ronaldo. Well, Hume, I thought, did really well at left back yesterday. I think it's a little bit clumsy, seeing him so biased to his right foot when he's on the left side, but actually his defending is pretty solid, and the wingers don't really have much change out of him. And then you see Geertruida in there in centre mid, and he was energy, he was breaking up play. I don't think we missed Siddiqui, and that's the biggest compliment you could possibly pay him. I thought he was excellent in there. And again, we talk about injuries. Well, I think if we'd had more injuries this season, he would have played pretty much every single game. He's like the 12th man in a lot of ways. He's the one you'd want to throw into the team if you had an injury anywhere all over the park in the defensive side of the pitch. I thought he was brilliant yesterday, and I was watching the game, and I came away not feeling anywhere near as anxious about not having Siddiqui, which is what I'd worried about. I've worried losing Siddiqui that we'd be like, oh no. And it also makes us less anxious about potentially losing Xhaka at some point if you've got Geertruida coming in there to be, or Geertruida, I keep saying his name differently. But if you've got him in there playing in that position, I don't think we'd miss Xhaka as much. I just think he's that quality of a player. So I really rate him. I think he's a top level player, and I think if we didn't sign him, another Premier League team would come in and buy him for that sort of money. I think he's been that good, so I think it would be stupid. Now the only question is whether or not he's happy being the 12th man. I don't know how these work. Is it agreed that if Sunderland, decide to trigger it, he just signs? Is that already all agreed, or is it a case of him going, do you know what, I think I can be a bona fide starter in a team in the Premier League, and that's what I want to do? I'm not 100% sure, but I really like him, and I've got no issues with him playing in this team. I think he looks like a really, really good player.
Yeah, I completely agree. YouTube user Skull on a Stick says, I like Geertruida being quality when he's played, and he's fitting with the rest of the lads really well, it seems. Be daft not to try and sign him. Andrew Watson on Facebook says, I don't think he's played enough to want to make it a permanent move, but I've thought he's been good in every game he's played. I guess a lot will depend on how much he plays between now and the end of the season. As Connor mentions, I'm not sure whether he's already agreed a contract with Sunderland and it would just be a case of buying him, or whether he'd have to renegotiate. My good feeling is usually in these scenarios, the player can actually reject a move if he wants to. But yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, where it just wasn't right for all parties, and they just decided to can it, didn't they? So yeah, it's an interesting one to watch. I mean, I've seen enough to want him at Sunderland. I think he's a really, really good player, and I would actually flip that and say that although he hasn't played like every minute, he has got the quality where he could break in, and I think Noah Siddiqui's absolutely brilliant, and he's been integral to the way we play. But if Geertruida kept that level of performance over like 5, 6, 7, 8 games, like that's a real question, depending on who the opposition is. Like Geertruida versus Siddiqui. Obviously, we haven't probably seen the volume of games in midfield from Geertruida to make that call yet. But that would be interesting to me, because I thought his levels yesterday were absolutely exceptional. We're going to move a little bit onto the Leeds game, Connor, but Granit Xhaka just continues to be.
Give me 2 moments. I have a ball.
No problem. I'll keep it going. But yeah, the point I was going to make was that Granit Xhaka continues to defy logic in his Sunderland career by just being genuinely excellent, but also he's avoided a 5th yellow card for, I think, the 3rd or 4th game in a row. So he's going to be fit for the Leeds United game, which is an absolutely huge boost. I'll get Connor's thoughts on that when he comes back. But we've got a comment from Neil Routledge, who says, think it's down to Geertruida if he's happy plugging gaps. He's good enough to be a regular Prem starter. I would agree, Neil. I think a lot of it will come down to the player. He seems to be really motivated and happy from what I can tell. He looks like he's enjoying life at Sunderland. Oh, here comes Conor Bromley. He's back. Yeah. We're still on Geertruida, but we're going to pivot to Granit Xhaka because he's avoided that yellow card, I think, for the 3rd or 4th game in a row. He continues to defy belief by just being completely excellent and not picking up a booking. That's a huge boost for the Leeds game, isn't it, for him to be available?
Yeah, it was the Arsenal game he picked up his 4th, so he's
done well. He's done very well.
Very, very well. Doesn't even look like picking up a booking, but yeah, it's integral. I mean, I was pretty irritated that him and well, in particular him against Liverpool, didn't pick up the yellow card because I thought puts an unnecessary strain on this Christmas period. Whereas he could have missed that Man City game. I know it's ridiculous, but we kind of all sort of wrote off that Man City game, didn't we, heading into the derby? I thought he should have picked one up there, but I look at it and to be honest, he doesn't look like picking up a yellow card. He's street smart, isn't he? And yeah, I think it's really, really good, and I think it's good to have him against Leeds because the Leeds game, it's a big game. I know it's not like a derby game or anything, but there is a bit of needle between Sunderland and Leeds. I think
there certainly was last season. I really enjoyed both of those two games. I know away from home we lost it late on with the two Pascal Struijk goals, but in terms of the atmosphere and the quality of the game and the drama, I thought was excellent. And then obviously at the Stadium of Light there was that Meslier howler.
Oh,
yeah. The back and forth between the two clubs' fan bases who were both hugely passionate. And obviously, there's the history with the 73 and all of that sort of stuff. And just, I think, like, generally Leeds' attitude in the summer was, well, you were 24 points behind us, we'll be all right. And then we've managed to overtake them for the moment. And obviously, they're having a little bit of resurgence under Daniel Farke, who I actually quite like, to be honest. I think there's always going to be a little bit of something in those games, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is a bit of needle between the two, and I think it's not like both fan bases don't hate each other. I don't think it's anything like that. But
it's like good needle, isn't it? It's like good needle. It's like the sort of needle you like. It's the sort of needle which is good fun, but it doesn't make your heart want to stop, like when you play Newcastle or something like that.
I'm not going to feel like sick if Sunderland were to lose to Leeds in the sense of what I would against Newcastle. But yeah, I think it'll be a really good game and a really good atmosphere at the stadium, which I'm really glad for. I think the Man City game 8:00 New Year's Day. I don't know what that's going to be like because it's an 8:00 on New Year's Day, but I think the Leeds game.
I would suggest everybody's going to be very intoxicated for that game.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, still intoxicated from the night before. Who knows? But I think it'll be interesting. Leeds are really. They're a team that I watch a lot of. I quite enjoy watching Leeds. I've been very curious as to how they do this season. It started because I thought we were going to be in a battle with Leeds all season. So I was watching them out of, expecting to be down there, and obviously we haven't been. But I watched them last night, and I thought they were brilliant. The way that they're set up, the spine of the team looks very, very strong, and the centre-backs are big bullies, really, really can dominate. They gave Mateta and Ketia last night no space. The midfield, again, it looks strong, it looks competitive, and they've got three in there. And then up front, they've got two big lads. I think Nemecha will be fit, so it'll be Calvert-Lewin and Nemecha, and they're two big, imposing centre forwards who are going to make Alderete and Ballard. I think there was a murmur that Ballard picked up an injury yesterday. I'm not 100% sure what's been said about that, but it's going to be a difficult night for those playing against those. But that being said, there's still things that we can get at in that team. I mean, they're trying to make Leeds out as a super team. They're not. they definitely have flaws that we can play through. I don't think they've got the best ball players. I would trust that Xhaka, as he has done pretty much all season, would help us control that middle of the park. And I think if you do control the middle of the park in your first or the second balls, you would probably hurt this Leeds team and win that battle. So they're definitely there to be beaten, but we're playing them at a bad time. They're on a bit of a high. Their away form's not great. That being said, they've only picked up 4 points, I think, on the road. There's 4 or 5 points on the road this season. They've not been great away from home, but this change they've done to 3 at the back or 5 at the back is made them look far, far better. So I think we're in for a difficult game, and on form, Leeds. I watched them beat Chelsea 3-1. I've watched them pick up a really good draw against Liverpool. They were unlucky last weekend against Brentford. They do look like they've really sort of turned a corner.
Yeah, let's have a look at some of these comments. Andrew Watson over on Facebook referencing Granit Xhaka says he's a manager on the pitch would be a big miss for any game. Andrew Watson also says Leeds matches I've watched this season, they seem to have problems picking up players moving into the edge of the 6-yard box late on. Mr. Bojingles says we need the hoardings brought in to limit the Leeds long throws. Well, I think if Sunderland can do that, they absolutely will, because they quite like to do that. Brian Lawson says, question, given the way we set up, who is the most effective striker on our books right now? That is a good question. I haven't had time to think about that because he's literally just commented. The most effective striker on our books at the moment. Do you know what? That we spoke about it last week, Connor, but that performance by Brian Broby against Newcastle United, just in terms of old-fashioned centre-forwards play, which might not necessarily be the most aesthetically pleasing thing on the eye in terms of total football or passing it around. I actually loved it because that's the sort of football I grew up watching. I thought it was brilliant to witness. I guess it comes down to like what flavour ice cream you like, because Isidore does things that Broby doesn't necessarily do. I think they've both got the place. I think they've both got the place and purpose starting games. I think you can easily flip it for the opposition. You can tailor it to the opposition. I'm still convinced that sometimes it's good to have Isidore running defences a little bit ragged for 60, 70 minutes. And then you bring Broby on, which he obviously did against Arsenal. He comes on against tired legs and he starts beating defenders up, and that can be really effective as well around that way. So I think it's, despite Sunderland not scoring loads and loads of goals in the past 2 matches, I think it's quite a nice problem to have, in my opinion. What's your take on Brian's question?
I think that we saw yesterday when Broby went off, that's when Brighton were really able to pen us in, and I think it's because we lost that ability to hold the ball up. I thought Broby did a really good job yesterday of winning the battles against those centre-backs. So, I think away from home, there's an argument maybe that Broby is the guy that you'd want to play just because his hold-up play is so good and he helps to relieve pressure. I would also then look at Isidore and, he seems to have a bit more of a I can score a goal kind of out of nothing, and he's got a bit of an X factor around him. It really depends what you're playing for, but I quite like right now playing the fact we can play either of them for an hour and then bring the other one on for half an hour. I quite like that. They're both very different players. I think if you could combine them, you'd probably have one of the best strikers in the world. But yeah, and this question here, comment, I love to see Isidore play off Broby. I think it'd be very, very interesting if we do ever go with Isidore off the left with Broby through the middle and see if that could potentially work as a system. And AFCON's probably the time to see it, but with us wanting to give Adingra minutes, I don't know if we will actually see it. But yeah, I think right now I'd probably edge with Broby is the guy I'd like to see start.
Interestingly, we have a late addition to the podcast. Welcome, Taff. We were only supposed to. We were only supposed to be. We were only supposed to be going.
1 second.
We were only supposed to be going 40 minutes, but I guess we'll extend it. Connor, if you need to drop off, then that's absolutely fine.
That's
but welcome, Taff. Right, the next part of the discussion I was going to go on to was the Leeds game. Obviously, Leeds play 5 at the back. Daniel Harrison actually touches upon it in the YouTube comments. Could we play 2 together against the Leeds team that play 5 at the back? I can see them working well together. Obviously, Taff, Leeds have moved towards this 5 at the back formation. Actually, for the first time in Daniel Farke's coaching career consistently, it's paid dividends for them. It's started to work. How do you see that game tactically? Because Sunderland at the moment are sort of favouring that 4-3-3, or it was more of a sort of a 4-2-3-1. I've even just saw it described as a bit of a 4-4-2 at times in defence. Would you be tempted to match Leeds at home, given that Régis Le Bris has played that system before? I know you're not massively keen on it. You often reference the Everton game, which I know is entirely fair, but do we have to match Leeds United at home, or should we just concentrate on playing our own game?
I think that if we've got to have... we can already have 5 in the midfield because, as you say, sometimes Lefay goes up as a second striker. Sometimes he can drop and sit back. So we've already have. If we play 4-2-3-1, then it's fluid like that, and you can press with Lefay and the wingers up high. But when you sit deeper, you will have 5 in the midfield. But I think it's quite important not to be overrun in the midfield. But we protect that zone just in front of the box pretty well. And I would expect Geertruida and Xhaka to sit in front of there again. And it's just about trying to cut out their play and press them higher up the field. But I actually think I can see why the appeal of 2 strikers, because if they've only got 3 at the back in transition or coming out, then maybe you can rob the ball high up. But Lefay already does that. I mean, he was running on yesterday, sometimes more advanced than Wilson or Broby at times. So I think that's kind of covered because Lefay works so hard on the pitch. So I wouldn't imagine an enormous change in the style or system or the numbers. Maybe a bit on the personnel on the wingers. I presume that you've already talked about Adingra.
We have. We have.
Yeah. So.
Right, YouTube comments. Martin says Leeds around 4 or 5 games ago started to play like us, went out of possession, has done wonders for them, and I think Farke has finally got it, and sadly Leeds will be okay. Neil Routledge says, I would like to see Isidore play from the left. He's been effective at his previous club in that position and scored goals. What's your thoughts? We'll also read a comment from YouTube user Robin Hood, who says, my ender may be on the right since we can't seem to figure that spot out, especially now without Traoré for the next handful. Conor, what's your thoughts tactically and personnel-wise on that big Leeds game coming up? Would you stick or would you twist?
I think I would probably line up the exact same way if everyone was fit. I think that you've got to give Adingra and Rigg the consecutive game time, in my opinion. You can't judge them, in my opinion, off one game where they've both been thrown in kind of from the cold.
Yeah.
So I want to see them get given time. I also think, yes, I can see the advantage of playing maybe an Isidore. I mean, we just talked about this before, potentially playing Isidore off the left, and I could see that. But the problem with that is then if you are losing the game, 1-0 on 65 minutes, what have we then got to do tactically? We can't change the front line. It'd be very, very difficult to change things around. And Mayenda on the right, again, I mean, Taff will know this. I've been an advocate of Mayenda on the right pretty much all season. I think both of us have, to be fair. We've been an advocate of Mayenda on the right. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. And I actually wonder if this weekend, if there was going to be a change, maybe it would be Mayenda coming in for Rigg. But then we've also got Remain Mundle we've got to think about. I mean, we've not even mentioned him on this podcast. He's a player that I really like the look of. He's quite explosive. He's defensively pretty solid. He probably could have scored, or maybe thinks he could have scored yesterday when he had that shot where he ran onto it and it was saved. So,
I think he should have. What he should have done is he should have taken a touch and gone down. In my opinion,
Yeah.
But he was so keen. He was so keen to get the shot off, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's what the commentator had said as well. He was like, "Run." He should have took the extra touch and got brought down. But yeah, I think we've got options out there. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing those things come in, but I just think knowing the manager, I don't think he's likely to leave himself without of one of Isidore and Bromley on the bench, because he needs to change it if he needs to change it.
Yeah, Changing Crisis on YouTube says, I think a front three of Robbie centrally, Isidore on the left and Mayenda on the right could cause Leeds many problems. Taff, I just cannot see Le Bris doing that, though, as Conor mentions.
No, I agree. Le Bris is caution first. And I thought what was interesting about the lineup yesterday, I think lots of people would like to see Mundle, but we saw no Sirkin and no Neil. I thought what was very interesting is that there was only really one new starter brought in. Everybody else is kind of already there. And even last year, Le Bris was very, very stuck and loyal to a sort of starting group of players. And I think if you're not in that, it's really hard to get a starting berth. So Rigg and Adingra started yesterday for the first time in a while, and there was never going to be any more. And so I think he's not going to start more than those two again at the weekend. And I think if he does want to start somebody else, then one of those won't start. He's so cautious, in a good way. He keeps us in a game. We're never thrashed. Man City aside, but they were superb. And the first half hour at Man United, but we're never thrashed, and he doesn't want to lose it. And first half goals are, we're always really tight. First half goals are minimal, and he only gets expansive after that. So I really can't see him throwing in lots of new players. So I think it'll probably be the same team again. If there is a change, it'll be one only. So it would be something like Rigg out and Mundle in with Adingra on the other side, perhaps. So it'll be only one change if there is any. From the weekend, I can see the appeal of two strikers, though, because one thing I noticed yesterday was that I thought Brobby looked very frustrated. He works really, really hard, and it's the same for Isidore. Work really, really hard, and they're often so isolated that when Brobby wins the ball, and he wins a lot of it, he got fouled a lot, but there was very few options for him to play off it. He gets very little ball facing goal, and he looked quite frustrated at not having much support. And I think if you are Brian Brobby, it's probably not much fun playing in the Bris's system. And I do wonder about that for him.
Interesting. And Taff, I want to touch on this a little bit again. We have been called obsessive for covering this point ad nauseum, but I think yesterday's game against Brighton really hammered it home again, and it's probably worth mentioning that Le Bris decided to start Trey Hume at left back over Dennis Sirkin. Dennis Sirkin didn't make it onto the pitch. Yeah. Dan Neil didn't make it onto the pitch again. And I think at the start of the season, when these new players were coming in and in the summer when they were all being bought, we looked at it objectively and said there's potential due to injury, suspension and AFCON that these players could get a chance. I think we all hoped that they'd get a chance as well. But for whatever reason, Le Bris sees them every day in training. I don't actually think it's contract related, having thought about it, because he was quite happy for Tommy Watson to come in and contribute last season, and he'd already agreed to join the club. So I actually have no doubt in my mind that if Le Bris thought that those two players in particular could contribute in the Premier League, that he would play them. But for me, I think in terms of their long-term Sunderland careers, the writing's on the wall for them, Taff.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a shame because although Hume is excellent wherever he's asked to play and whatever job he's asked to do, even when he was folding inside to the midfield where he was not, I would rather have a proper midfielder. He was doing a decent job, and he does a decent job at left back. But he's not left-footed. He does get done a bit easier for crosses than a left-footed fullback would do. Now we're quite strong in the air, but I think those things do matter, and I'd rather see a left-footed fullback there. And I get why people say, Sirkin isn't good enough, but he also hasn't had the chance to prove that he's not good enough or prove that he is good enough. But again, Le Bris caution, especially with AFCON, which is why I'm surprised we haven't seen one or two of these players given 15 minutes, in Man City and before then. I wonder why. I mean, he's not going to introduce a raft of players out of nowhere now. So you had Mundell slowly coming back. Adingra gets his chance. Rigg starts again. I find it hard to see that Neil and Sirkin will get game time straight out of the gate. So it does look like the writing's on the wall, which means that we must have a left back because I don't think you can keep playing Trey Hume there as good as he does, whatever job you ask him.
Yeah, Robin over on YouTube says, I always thought Sirkin might be able to play at Prem level. Lee Reid says that Le Bris was asked about Dan Neil in the press conferences and pivoted to say that the players who hadn't had a chance would have opportunities. He avoided Neil directly, which told us a lot. I guess, Connor, now the only question is whether it will be in January or the summer. Obviously, both players are entering the last 6 months of their contract. They could sign a pre-contract agreement somewhere else for the summer, which then could be accelerated in January if a club want to pay money to get them now. And it's a tough one, isn't it? Because Sunderland will have a list of targets and there will be left-backs and central midfielders on that list. And if they can secure a couple of those targets, I can absolutely hear them. I can absolutely see them saying, right, lads, you can find somewhere else to go. As sad as that is for me as well, because both players are double promotion winners. Dan Neil's a guy we've seen come through the Academy of Light. I think that the reason I'm so fond of Dan Neil is because I've seen how much it means to him. I saw the scenes after the Coventry second leg semi-final game. I was privileged enough to be pitch side, to see his reaction, to see the reaction of his family. Dan Neil's somebody who stayed at Sunderland when he didn't actually have to, under Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven, when young players were being sold left, right and centre. Anthony Patterson was similar. They actually dug their heels and then said, no, we're not going anywhere. We want to play for our boyhood club. I do have a great deal of fondness and respect for Dan Neil and Dennis Sirkin as well, because he's been with the club a long time and he's actually achieved something with us. It would be sad ends to those Sunderland careers. But unfortunately, the Premier League and the price of progression is ruthless sometimes.
Yeah, and it absolutely is. Selling them in January, how much money are you going to get with two players that got 6 months left? And also, what is the value? Because Dan Neil and Dennis Sirkin were both linked with Premier League clubs. Well, they can't get into newly promoted Sunderland's team. So if you're a club in the Premier League, you're not going to take necessarily the chance of these two players. So we're then looking at top-end Championship or foreign clubs to potentially to buy in there. So what are we talking? Because a Championship club, like would Ipswich, who I think, to be honest, should have been all over Dan Neil when they were looking at Hayden Hackley in the summer. Would Ipswich, though, be happy to spend anything more than £2-4 million on Dan Neil? I don't
Not
know.
when his contract's up, yeah.
Would Sunderland loan him? Well, no. What would that achieve? You'd rather have him in the building than loan him out. I think it's ultimately telling to me that Dan Neil and Dennis Sirkin, I know all these fringe players, look happy at Sunderland. They look like on the Derby game, they are the ones leading the charge in the middle. They feel part of the group. And therefore, for me, you keep them in the building until the end of the season. The PSR or SCR, as it's going to be, the argument for that, I understand. But the money that you're going to get isn't going to be that big. You'd rather have them in the building in case, as we talked about before, Sunderland could have an injury crisis. They could lose 3 central midfielders tomorrow to injury in training. It could happen. You need to have players like Dan Neil there to potentially come in and do that job. So, personally, I wouldn't sell them. unless you were to bring in central midfielders.
Taff, do you think it's now, or do you think it's in the summer if you had to put money?
Taff's frozen, or
he's gone.
doing
He's
his great
frozen.
statue impression. I don't know.
He looks to have frozen. The other question, Connor. This podcast's been a great deal of fun. Honestly, the first stream was an absolute disaster, so we've had to make a second one. Taff's joined halfway through, and now he's frozen. Oh, now he's gone as well. Anyway, the question I've been asked online, actually, Connor, coming into this podcast, centered around January as well, and we've touched a little bit upon it with the Wilson Isidore, Brian Bromley, Eliza Mayenda chat. But do Sunderland actually go out as well and look at another striker in January? We know that it's a really hard part of the pitch to recruit in, particularly in January. Like I think that's almost sort of forgotten about the transfer business and transfer windows. Everybody is always after a striker all of the time, and it's actually really, really difficult to identify a good one and get them through the door, especially in January. You usually have to pay a big premium. We are talking in the Premier League, unless you're buying potential. To get a proven striker in the Premier League, you're talking like 40, 50, 60, 70 million. Yeah. It is a big ask for me in January.
I would agree with that. I personally wouldn't buy a new striker in January. I don't think there is a need. I don't think our goal-scoring issue stems from the centre-forward position. I don't think Brian Bromley or Wilson Isidore are doing anything particularly wrong. I mean, even the Isidore 2 chances, and me and Taff have talked about this a million times on our show, he didn't do anything wrong with either of those chances. It's not like he spooned them over the bar or he rolled them at the goalkeeper. It was just good goalkeeping. You know, it was against Alisson and it was against Donnarumma, who's been voted the best goalkeeper in the world. I don't think striker's the problem. I think the problem, to be honest, just lays a little bit deeper. I think we don't take tons of risks. That's just the reality of how we play. And as I've said, you know, and I'll beat this drum at the end of the day, I think the problem that we have comes from the right wing. We didn't buy, of everything we did in the summer, we didn't buy an adequate right winger. I think that I look at, say, Fatawu, who I watch a lot of at Leicester, and I feel like he's kind of ready-made for this team. He's defensively pretty solid, but he's also got that ability to score from nothing. Again, I talk to Taff about this all the time. We don't score long-range goals. We don't take shots from range. The shots we do take from range aren't very good. And you watch a lot of Premier League football, how are Aston Villa third in the Premier League right now? Because they can score goals from range. And when you can score goals from range, it helps with other things because it means that defences have to respect that you can score from range, which creates spaces elsewhere on the pitch. So I think we do have issues to address in the attacking third, but plonking in Erling Haaland into this team, you're not going to suddenly start scoring goals. That's not going to happen because the issues are far deeper than that. We're a team that is trying its best to stay in every game and turn every game into a sort of a coin flip. Can we exploit your error and score a goal in a game? That's what we're desperately trying to do in every game this season. Can we win a flick on from a set piece? Can we do those sorts of things? That's how we win games of football. And I don't think the strikers, the way that Brobby plays is perfect for our system because he helps relieve pressure defensively. That's what we need because we're more worried about not letting other teams score.
Let me run through some of these YouTube comments and then I'll throw the same question to Taff. One YouTube user says Serkin and Neil not being played must mean we have signings lined up. Being Leanne says, I really feel for them, but sadly this is the reality of the Premier League. Mr. Bojingle says, it's sad, but the model is buy and sell. That's the evolution of the club. Robin Hood says, you're pretty much looking at championship teams for Serkin and Neil now. Another comment saying, what do we know about their contracts? Over the past few years, we've had a few emergency one-year extensions. Reckon we could extend and make a bit of money over the summer. I just can't see that happening, to be honest. I'm not sure what the incentive would be for Neil and Serkin to agree from that. Another YouTube comment says, as players, they must want to play, and so it's better for them to move on. I think probably yes, because Dan Neil and Dennis Serkin have been regulars, bar an injury, for 2 or 3 years now. Neil Routledge says, I've always liked Dan Neil, think his style is more suited to the Italian league, a bit less slower football, more time on the ball. I think he would thrive in that league. Thoughts? I do think that Dan Neil does benefit from time on the ball, as would every midfielder. I thought Tony Mowbray's comments were interesting on Dan Neil because he said that he wanted Dan Neil to push up a bit more, play through the lines. He doesn't tend to do that. He's a bit more cautious, which is perhaps by design as well, because Sunderland started to play him in the number 6 role. So, I mean, I think we've covered that really. Being Leanne says, having watched the Leeds game yesterday, Connor, does it worry you more about the upcoming game? Answer that briefly, and then I'll go to Taff on the striker question.
Yes, that is my brief answer. Yes, it does worry me. I think they are in form, and that it doesn't matter that they're a new promoted team. They are in form. They've got a striker who scored 6 and 5. That's always going to be a problem. So yes, I am a little bit more. I was worried. I mean, I'm not staying up at night thinking about it, but
shivering, shaking in his bed, the sweat dripping from his head.
I'm not quivering. No, I'm not quivering. But yes, in terms of the game, I do not think we're going to be in for an easy afternoon next Sunday.
Mr. Ripsaw on YouTube kindly says top quality video, guys, liked and subscribed. Taff, thoughts on this? Thoughts on the striker question in January? I've had a few social media users asking whether that's an area of the pitch Sunderland should strengthen. Connor has given his view. I've given my view. I think it's a really hard area of the pitch to recruit in January. Personally, Connor added that Wilson Isidore and Brian Broby are doing a good job. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there was rumours about that Mexican striker at where is it? Milan? Is it Santi Jimenez?
Yeah.
There's rumours about him, but I don't think it's the most pressing place to recruit. I think clearly we need a left back because there's no left back trusted beyond Renildo. We need a right winger, and I agree with what Connor said. That I think our problems lie deeper. They lie deeper, and they're not really problems. They lie in the way that we play at the minute. Le Bris doesn't want to lose, want to keep us in games. I think this is great. If we end up with a 0 goal difference, we will historically, like eternally, be somewhere between 9th and 12th. And that would be an amazing achievement. Now, going forwards, next year, the year beyond that, you're going to have to do something different. You can't do that every year. So you have to start thinking about how might we be a bit more adventurous? How might we be more creative? And so if you're thinking about that, then our wingers are not particularly effective enough in supporting the striker or creating balls. We don't, as Connor said, take enough risks, even further back than that. Our only creative midfielder in the centre is Le Fay. And it's really noticeable that Wilson or Traore play much better when Le Fay is behind them, but he can't be in both places, even though he works so incredibly hard. So having a midfielder who can be as strong in dictating play and tackling as Xhaka or Siddiqui, and as creative and linking as Le Fay, those are the missing properties. And then having quality wingers that deliver a ball. I actually think that Mundell is a really quality winger. And every time he comes on, we look an awful lot more dangerous when he's on the pitch. After his initial introduction yesterday, I think we sat back a lot to defend the lead, sort of 65 minutes, and he didn't get that chance. But I always think we look more dangerous when he's on the field, and he had the clearest shot on goal, I think, yesterday. And I don't, so I think there are other areas. I don't think a striker solves it. I think the strikers need to be solved by a little bit about the way we play, a little bit about adding more creativity in midfield and on the wings.
Have we got another 15, 20 minutes left in us? We've done an hour, but the comments are starting to roll in, so I've got to double check with you. Connor, how are you fixed?
I might be repeating what you said. Who knows?
I mean, I do need to walk the dog at some point, but I can certainly give you another 10 minutes.
Let's do 10 minutes. Right, I'm told that this username is being being Laney is how it's pronounced. So I will endeavour to do better with my pronunciations going forward. But this particular user also adds, do you know if there's anything in the rumour of Mayenda going on loan to Leicester? I mean, if I was a championship club, I would be interested in Mayenda because he's young and he's shown that he can do it. Particularly a short-term loan from January would seem really appealing because he's obviously not in the squad. However, if I was Sunderland, as we mentioned actually, Connor, in terms of his age and his profile, unless he was really desperate to go and play regular games, I'm not sure I'd let him, with the caveat that if Sunderland do strengthen again in January, that maybe he has to go out on loan. But for me, I think he stays and you reassess in the summer is my good feeling.
Yeah, I mean, if you got an injury to Isidore against Leeds, then you need Mayenda.
Exactly. So Connor, do you concur?
Yeah, I wouldn't be getting rid of. I mean, this is all. I would say that all we've talked about with players leaving has to be caveated with if we sign a player. If we sign a new centre forward, which I don't think we will do because we've just spent £25 million on Brian Broby and we're just seeing the best of Brian Broby right now, it wouldn't make much sense. The other thing you've got to think about with Le Bris is I don't think that he likes to chuck players in who haven't really had pre-season. Think about the players that we've signed who came in late in the deadline. Most of them took ages for them to get established in the team because he doesn't want to chuck them in. If we signed a player in January we're not actually going to start seeing them play regular football until middle of February because he needs that much time to get his system ingrained in them. There's only been a few that have come in and have played regularly, and that was desperation. Alderete had to come in and play straight away. Mukele had to come in and play straight away. But you look at Geertruida, if you look at Bromley, they were the two ones we brought in on deadline day. They've not, it's taken them ages to actually get themselves sort of established in the team because it takes so long to get used to how we want to play. So I don't think we'll necessarily do massive business in January. I just think we just need a right winger for me. I know, and Taff mentioned a left back. They are the two positions that we really need to get sorted out.
I do like this comment because I think it's aimed at you, Connor, from SJ30,000 that says, "Are Leeds suddenly Real Madrid now? Some fans are going over the top. They're in form. It doesn't mean we are now going to get spanked." Comments like this really tickle me. I know that I was just about to say the comments like this really tickle me because we never actually said that, and I haven't seen any Sunderland fans say that Sunderland are going to get spanked. All have pointed out is that, Leeds have hit a bit of form, and usually that's significant because that's what you look at is form coming into a game. I mean, if we didn't look at these things, we might not have things to talk about.
Yeah. It was really good. They were really good last time when you watched them. I mean, I also, when we were talking about Leeds, said that their away form's absolutely honking. So, they drew against Brentford the other week. So, I don't think we're worried about Leeds. As we said before, I am not quivering thinking about playing Leeds. So, yeah, they're not Real Madrid. They're still a bog-standard Premier League team that are just...
Yeah, absolutely. We've also got another question here from a YouTube user. When will we get credit for making teams play bad? Is it when we finish in the top half? I actually think we've had a fair amount of credit, Taff. In terms of the general punditry around us, I'm actually quite pleased with some of the narratives because I think people have been quite nice about us. The only thing I would say is that there's been like a couple of things that, like I saw Wayne Rooney and Micah Richards after the Newcastle game say that Granit Xhaka's the signing of the season in the Premier League, and I'm just sort of like, yeah, fair enough, lads, but you're about 4 weeks late with that. But generally, I actually think we've had a pretty fair ride in terms of the punditry around us.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty cheap to begin with, but even Jamie Carragher has retracted his "we will be relegated" talk now. So I think that the punditry is generally in praise of us. And I don't even think that people are suggesting we're going to drop very far. I think people will say, well, we might drop off. Maybe we won't. But even if they do say we're going to drop off, they're not suggesting we're going to drop off very far. I think most people would have us above 15th these days. So I think we get a fair amount of credit. Certainly, you look at the way teams play against us and the managers take us very seriously indeed. So I think we get... the thing is, we're not... I mean, I didn't watch it last night, but I presume we were the last game on Match of the Day last night.
We were allotted 7 minutes of time.
Yeah. The way we play is so tight and so controlled, and there aren't going to be many chances for both teams. So it's not the most exciting sort of neutral spectacle. But it is very organised, it is very controlled. And at times, some of the substitutions and the changes are very clever. So you can get a lot of credit, but only in conversation. I think if you're looking for lots of credit in highlights and wowness across the media, that isn't going to come because it's not jazzy enough for them. But that's a different thing.
Okay, last round of YouTube comments and maybe one last question, and then we'll tail it off. Being Laney said, "I would really like to see Mayenda on the right." Another YouTube user says, "Can see a former Régis Le Bris player slotting directly into the team. He does have form for that with Enzo Lefebvre last January." Neil Routledge says, "Talby on the right doesn't really work, but he works hard. I would like to see him in the Lefebvre position just behind the striker. I quite like him on the wing, to be honest." Being Laney says, "The atmosphere at the Sol is enough to put any team off their game, including Real Madrid," which is a good shout. This one's a historical question from earlier on, but Robin's just reminded me of it. What about Fatawu, at Leicester for a winger? He's a name that keeps cropping up, and I think Sunderland trying to get him in the summer. He's having a decent season as well. I think there'd be competition, Connor. Whether Sunderland could do it in January is interesting because he would probably have to pay over the odds to get them in January just because it's a nightmare of a time for a club to lose a player. But I like him, and I think he does fit the profile of player that Sunderland like to go for, doesn't he?
He does, and I'm just going to quickly type in the EFL Championship table because I'm pretty sure that Leicester got spanked yesterday against QPR 4-1 at home. So Leicester currently 13th, 5 points from the playoffs, and are also going to potentially get a point deduction. Also, didn't pay their staff when they were expecting to get paid over Christmas.
Oh,
so
dear.
Leicester, I suspect, probably do need a little bit of cash. So I think it's an attainable signing for Sunderland. I think he does tick a lot of boxes. I mean, I remember in the summer when we were first linked to him, I did a lot of research and watched a lot of Fatawu playing, and I thought, yeah, he looks to me like a player that we'd like. As I said, defensively, pretty solid, good dribbler with the ball, scores goals as well. His stats in the Premier League last season, he actually picked up a big injury last season, so I think he played 11 games. But his stats were very, very good in those 11 games, very high on dribbling, taking on men, considering Leicester wouldn't have had the ball as well. You know, he did come out quite well in that sort of short sample size. So I think he's a player that's Sunderland like. He's also a good age. If you're talking £25 million, which I would guess would roughly be the sweet spot, you know, this is a player that you could potentially sell for 50 in 18 months, 2 years' time, if all goes well. And that is what Sunderland want to do, isn't it? So I think Fatawu makes a lot of sense. The only thing I would say is we haven't signed from the Championship at all. So maybe they wouldn't want to do that because the market will be inflated. But with that, what I just said about Leicester potentially being in financial trouble, maybe a deal could be done there. But I think other teams will be sniffing around, especially, you know, if you look at, say, West Ham, who are fighting for their lives. If a player like Fatawu becomes available, I've just seen them linked with Jacob Strand-Larsen as well from Wolves. There are teams that are going to be in desperate situations to sign players and may put more money in because they're so desperate to get a player for that position. And I don't think Sunderland are desperate right now to bring in players, so I don't know.
He's 21, is Fatawu Taff. He does have a little bit of Premier League experience as well from last season. I think he played 11 or 12 games. Would you be happy with Sunderland signing him for around sort of that 20-25 million mark?
I mean, I would, but I'm not sure you'll get him for that. But I also think that it's not fair to say that I agree we don't sign the Championship because they're overinflated and there's probably better value elsewhere. I don't think we're that desperate. I think there'll be players who could be as good as him if we went again in the summer to Europe. But he is a good player and he exactly fits our profile. And I do think that we probably need more creativity. And if he can play as the wing or as an inside, then that might be, that would be very good. So I'd be quite for it. But I don't know. I don't know if they're going to pay the odds. There will be other teams who are deeply desperate who would probably pay more than us and would be prepared to pay more wages than us as well. I don't know how much he'd be motivated by that. There's all sorts of talk. There was talk the other day about redoing that Sassuolo. That was the player from Sassuolo, the Armand
Armando Loriente.
There's talk about that being revived because so it's clear being in for him and being in for Fatawu, it is clear that the club want a young, explosive, goal-scoring winger on the right, and that Traore is simply a one-year stopgap. So, I mean, if you get them in for January, then they're going to be flying out of the gates come the start of next season. So I could see something like that happening, and I could see the benefit of it, particularly for next season. But it's not essential. You still have the summer to get people. But it's clear that the club are looking at these sort of things because they tried to inquire about Fatawu. They nearly signed Loriente. So it is obviously something that the club are trying to get. Whether they get it in January is another question. But I like him as a player.
Gerard on YouTube says, don't want any Championship players or players from relegated side, especially for 25 million. We only sign progressive young wingers, preferably from teams winning their leagues. Another YouTube user says...
Like Connor said, he was injured last year, so he played very little in the Premier League for Leicester. But when he did, he was great. They really missed him. They put a lot of money into him. They didn't buy broadly enough, and so they missed him when he was injured. So it's not an entire reflection on him that he's a relegated man. Although I don't think it makes a difference on his own.
Another YouTuber says, I remember the number floating around in the summer was about 35 to 40 million, which is fairly steep. Right, we're going to tail the podcast off because Colin needs to walk his dog. I have a baby in the house somewhere who has been looked after by his mother that I also probably need to pay some attention to. Taff, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to quickly round off some of these comments. We have another comment from YouTube saying, loving these, keep it up. Another saying, this is the happiest Christmas in memory. Happy Christmas, lads and lasses. John and Ross says, hi from sunny Florida. Another YouTuber says, Merry Christmas, everyone. Hope you all get what you wanted for Christmas. 30 points to start 2026. That would be nice. Neil Routledge says, all the best for Christmas, lads. Billy GW Morgan says, Happy Easter, boys, which, I think that's...
I mean, I hope we have a happy Easter. If we have a happy Easter, we might be top 10 for sure.
Absolutely. Lads, thank you very much for joining us again. We've gone like an hour and 15 minutes, which has been great. Lots of comments. It's nice to see this little community building. Tell me, Connor, what you have got coming up this week and what people can tune into after the Brighton game ahead of Leeds.
So me and Taff will be doing our review probably later today, which will be out probably later today of the Brighton game. Then we've got propaganda. We're going to do end of year propaganda as well, where we look at all the amazing stuff from like the playoff run and stuff. I'm sure that'll all be in there, so that'll be fun. I don't know if we'll do that this week, but we'll do it at some point. And then we'll have our preview for Leeds, which we'll record well before Christmas Day, because I don't think we want to be recording on Christmas Day.
No, and that brings me to another good point, actually, Taff, that I have no idea when we'll do another one of these, but hopefully we'll bring you on at some point. What have you got coming up over the next couple of days that's different from Connor?
No, Idordy tells me to, absolutely.
His work wife.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, fantastic. You can find Connor and Taff over on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all of the good stuff. We're also on the Sunderland Echo website. You can buy a paper if you want to as well. We're across YouTube. All of that good stuff. We will hopefully be back after the Leeds game, hoping about a win. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But yeah, cheers for watching, and we'll see you next time.